Welcome everyone, and thank you to our guests, our members, and other participants joining us today in our ACEC Lunch and Learn webinar. My name is Caroline Andrews. I'm the President and CEO of the Association of Consulting Engineering Companies, British Columbia. Today we're meeting in potentially more than 250 separate locations. And so to unify us, we'd like to acknowledge that ACEC is based in the ancestral, traditional, and unceded territories of the Coast Salish peoples, in particular the Squamish, Musqueam, and Tsleil-Waututh First Nations. Our association represents more than 9,500 people working at 80 consulting engineering firms across British Columbia. ACEC's purpose is to serve the interests of members through advocacy, creating opportunity for collaboration, and building profile for members and the industry. During this unprecedented time, we're working together to support our member companies and the industry in general. And while we miss meeting in person, we continue to seek opportunities to build connection with members, clients, and partners at events like this through our website, our COVID-19 Resources Center, and through ACEC's many committees and networks. All of our operations, including events, have shifted to the virtual environment so that we can continue to support your practice as you work from home. In the coming weeks, we'll be offering additional virtual events, including tomorrow, ACEC-BC's annual general meeting, which we will host virtually prior to the AGM. We are delighted to welcome Leanna Ma, President, Engineers and Geoscientists BC, for a keynote address and Q&A session. Next week at this time on June 17th, Mark Wiedemann, President and CEO of Partnerships BC, will be back with us to talk about the competitive alliance contracting model. And the following week on June 24th is our first virtual client mixer with Metro Vancouver, featuring their CAO, Jerry Dobrovolny, and his leadership team. Registration for our next webinar and the Metro Vancouver mixer will be live on our website soon. For advance notice of webinars, please join our email list through the website. You can always stay up to date with us by visiting the ACEC-BC website, where you'll find regular updates, relevant industry content, and information from our partner network. There, you can also connect with us through the feedback portal to help provide us your perspective on how your organization is managing and how we can help. Today, we're joined by 4 panelists to discuss infrastructure stimulus programs and opportunities available for consultants and clients to work together to support BC and Canada's economic recovery. We are all familiar with the heavy toll on our economy resulting from the COVID-19 pandemic. As we begin to look beyond the crisis towards economic recovery, we thought it might be helpful to gain perspective on programs to support infrastructure development, one of the primary levers government and other agencies have to stimulate the economy. Today's webinar is intended to be interactive, and we'll answer as many questions from participants as we can. To ask a question, please click on the Q&A icon at the bottom of your Zoom screen and type your question into the dialog box. I'll do my best to paraphrase if necessary and get as many questions answered as possible. To preemptively answer the very first question that I know we're going to get, I am happy to let you know that our panelists have agreed to record and post this webinar. Following the session, you'll receive a link to the webinar recording, which will be posted to the ACEC-BC website. It is my pleasure to introduce our panelists for today. I'll begin with my colleague, John Gamble, President and CEO of the Association of Consulting Engineering Companies of Canada. John is recognized nationally and internationally as an expert and spokesperson on engineering, business, and public policy. John's success is built upon combined experience in the public, private, and not-for-profit sectors. Before joining ACEC Canada, he held management and executive positions in a number of professional and industry associations and served as a senior advisor to cabinet ministers in the Ontario provincial government. John holds a Bachelor of Science degree in civil engineering from Queen's University, and he spent the first 10 years of his career practicing environmental engineering in a leading consulting firm. Welcome, John. Also joining us from Ottawa is Patrick Kehoe, Advisor, Programs Outreach, Green Municipal Fund for the Federation of Canadian Municipalities. As an advisor with the Federation's Programs Outreach team, Patrick supports Canadian municipalities in the evaluation and implementation of innovative, sustainable development initiatives equipping communities and their partners with the tools and resources needed to pursue ambitious environmental projects. With a Bachelor of Physical Geography and a postgraduate degree in Environmental Management, Patrick has worked with conservation authorities in Ontario to improve asset management and develop source water protection plans. He's also contributed to land use studies for First Nation communities right here in British Columbia. Welcome, Patrick. Charles Scott, Director of Business Development for Hubspace. Charles is the Director of Business Development at Hubspace, a provincially funded economic development agency, and a member of the University of Northern British Columbia's School of Business. In his role, Charles provides strategic planning, marketing, and economic development services to help entrepreneurs to strategically position their firms and communities to adapt to change. And last but not least is Derek Baker, Director of Economic Development, Northern Development Initiative Trust. As Director of Economic Development at Northern Development, Derek works collaboratively with communities through central northern BC to identify economic development priorities and align them with funding and capacity building opportunities. Please join me in welcoming John, Patrick, Charles, and Derek. In planning today's panel, we thought it best we would start with a short roundtable discussion so that we can learn a bit more about our panelists, their organizations, and the work they do to support public infrastructure. Charles, would you like to kick us off?
Certainly. So Hubspace, or the Innovation Central Society, is a member of the BC Accelerator Network. So the provincial government, through Innovate BC, has a provincial network of organizations that are here to help firms to check out new opportunities, enter new markets, deal with whatever aspects of their business is holding them back. In our case, we were approached by members of the engineering community about the potential to help ensure that when funding for shovel-ready projects was ready, there were as many shovel-ready projects as possible. And so that's the sort of thing that we do. We help them find doorways to opportunity. They have to be able to walk through the doors. So there is, of course, a network of these organizations covering most of the province. So if you've got a firm that's looking at exploring new opportunities and you'd like another set of eyes to help you do that, we're here to help.
Thank you very much, Charles. John.
Oh, well, good morning or afternoon, is the case. I guess it's all afternoon now. Greetings from Ottawa, the unceded traditional lands of the Algonquin First Nation, and where tax money and good ideas go to die. A little facetious. What I'll be touching on a little bit is our sort of our engagement with the federal government along with our stakeholder partners. ACEC Canada, we're an umbrella organization representing 12 provincial and territorial associations, including ACEC-BC. We represent collectively the consulting engineering industry from sea to sea to sea, and we're predominantly engaged, like ACEC-BC, in advocacy on both business practices on behalf of the industry, and probably more germane to this particular discussion on public policy, and particularly what the federal government has been sharing with us. What are they working on in terms of helping our industry in particular, but also more generally using our industry and using stimulus as an opportunity to rebuild the economy and rebuild our economic capacity, and some of the struggles that they may be challenging with, where we might have to stand up to them a little bit, and where we might be able to help them along. So look forward to interacting with the other panelists.
Thank you, John. Patrick, also in Ottawa.
Thank you, Caroline. Yes, also in Ottawa. I was actually supposed to be in Kelowna this morning and flying to Prince George tonight. So I guess that's not happening, but hopefully eventually soon I'll be able to get back to BC. So I'm a programs advisor for the Federation of Canadian Municipalities. And for those of you who don't know a ton about our organization, FCM. Basically, we're a national member-based organization with our members, obviously being the Municipalities of Canada. We largely act as a lobbying body to the federal government to advocate on the interests of our members. So anything from rural broadband to cannabis legalization to environmental sustainability, municipal infrastructure, which is what we'll be focusing on today. As part of that advocacy, we have a series of programs that are occasionally provided with buckets of money that we can deliver directly to our members through direct funding, and also through capacity building and knowledge resources and that kind of stuff to help spur projects and connect peers together to learn a little bit more about what others are doing and what maybe they could do in their communities. The Green Municipal Fund, which is the program I'll be speaking of most today, is, as mentioned, focused mainly on sustainable municipal infrastructure. It's to date about 20 years old. We're celebrating our 20th year anniversary this year. The fund is up to $1.6 billion, so it's pretty large and funds over 60 unique funding products, so really quite a broad offer that we provide. So yeah, I'm basically here just to talk about sort of what we can offer municipalities through that, whether it be setting up projects through feasibility studies to actual capital financing for full construction projects. So I'm excited to chat with the rest of the panel and share a little bit about how we are positioning our fund to really support communities in this time that we're all in. So thank you.
Thanks, Patrick. And Derek.
Good morning, everybody. For those of you who are not familiar with Northern Development, we are a granting agency based out of Prince George, British Columbia. We service from as far south as Lytton in the interior of the province, all the way north to the Yukon border, and west to Haida Gwaii, east to Valemont. So we have a fairly large service area. Roughly covers about 70–75% of the province. And our grant programs are primarily for the purpose of stimulating economic development in our service area. Our primary clients that we serve are municipalities, being both local governments or First Nation bands, as well as not-for-profits. As our name would suggest, we are a trust, so we make available a percentage of our capital base every year. And each year, the amount of funding that we put into the region varies depending on a number of factors, but typically it's in the $10 to $14 million range that we grant into our service area. We are primarily supporting infrastructure projects that are not core municipal responsibilities. So much more focused on the type of projects that are in addition to sewer, water, roads, all those kind of things. So I'll leave it there today. Really just looking at providing perspective from a funder's point of view, and hopefully provide some advice along the way on the best way to approach funders when the anticipated stimulus funding does come to fruition, and hopefully that's soon.
That's great. Thanks, everyone. Yeah, we thought, without the general announcement, and reasonably governments are being a bit cautious, I would assume. So there's a lot of money right now being put into, stemming the flow and helping individuals and helping people sort of bridge the gap. And so what we're looking at is that, that broader perspective looking forward. So we thought it might be helpful maybe to just kick things off with a look to senior government. And, John, you're there in Ottawa, and I know, Charles, you've had some conversations with senior government, we'll call them rumors, senior government. And Patrick, you may also have some perspective given the geography there. So we thought we'd start with that level, and then we'll drill down a little bit into some of the challenges for BC municipalities. So John, maybe if you could kick us off. This also helps us because we want to see what how members are being represented at the federal level. We're looking to Ottawa for those signals on broader investment, and so we thought perhaps see if there's any news or activity in the capital that's promising with respect to future investment.
Activity, yes. I don't know if there's any definitive news other than they did advance $2 billion of the gas tax fund, which is helpful. It's not going to put us over the top. But starting off with a little context, we're fortunate that we have a government that is pro-infrastructure. In fact, none of the parties are against infrastructure. The Investing in Canada plan, it was a significant investment. All totaled, all these infrastructure programs come to about $180 billion over about 12 years. We're about 4 years into that. You know, and we were fortunate because the previous government, they had at the time the Building Canada plan, and at the time they quite rightfully said this is the biggest infrastructure program ever. And not to be outdone, the current government came in and they said, well, we're going to double down on that and we're going to put in our own $60 billion program, and that's great news. They're configured a little differently. Whereas, and this is a broad brush generalization, but the legacy Building Canada plan, in the new Building Canada plan, were very much nuts and bolts infrastructure projects in general. Whereas the Investing Canada plan has more, shall we say, aspirational views about leveraging infrastructure for some very specific societal goals, and they put in the 3 buckets: community infrastructure, transit, and green infrastructure. And that summation means that there's a lot of money committed to infrastructure. And then there's other plans like the Trade Corridors Funds, plus specific funds that are available to things like airports and other specific items, plus the federal government's own in-house infrastructure. So there's lots of money that's committed. Now that we're into a recession, how do we get that money into the economy in a way that it can do things effectively? Now, these programs are all back-end loaded. The majority of the money comes in the latter years of the program. So one of the things that we have been suggesting is let's take some of that money at the back end and see if we can get this into the economy sooner. That solves a lot of problems. For one thing, it flattens our curve, because one of the fears we always have in our industry, in the broader construction industry and the whole supply chain, is you start off with modest programs and they ramp up and they ramp up and they ramp up, and then the program ends. And so we're charging up a hill without seeing what's on the other side. So we said, let's try and flatten this curve so that there's a robust, predictable pipeline of projects. And then we can manage that. We can make informed business decisions to get us through there. So there's a lot of opportunity through that, but there is one big catch. A lot of these programs are predicated on matching funding from municipalities. And municipalities cannot run deficits. And they have, across the board, seen major drops in revenue. And a lot of them are approaching dire straits, and a lot of municipal employees have gone home. And if we don't have municipalities applying for these programs, if we don't have municipalities there to put out RFIs and RFQs and RFPs for engineering and architectural work, and if they're not there to put out the tenders, then we're not going to have much of a opportunity to put infrastructure into rather stimulus into infrastructure. And so that's extremely problematic. That was not an issue in the previous recession. And of course, the whole point is putting money into infrastructure is because it's return on investment and it's growing the broader economy. It's not just for the health of the design and construction industry. The Conference Board of Canada, after the last recession, concluded that for every dollar you invest in infrastructure, you add about $1.20 to GDP, and that would be very welcome right now. So I'll pause there. There's a lot of other issues, but I think that's the real opportunity. If we can find a way to keep the municipalities in business, get money out to them, get money into the economy, and then we can start rebuilding.
Yeah, I like that comment about avoiding the back end loading, just smooth it out a little bit. Yeah, Charles, did you have anything you wanted to add from the research that you did?
Yes. So when we were approached by the engineering community in our region with a question of can you assist us in terms of helping projects get shovel ready, we worked through both the administrative and political side to try and get some feedback. And pretty consistently, the feedback we got from a variety of sources was that the specifics are short because they haven't been determined yet, so it's not really something we can talk about. But broadly speaking, the initial thinking, and I'd like to point out this is initial thinking, it is not an indication of a final decision, is that it looks like there'd be more of an emphasis on asset management items, things that are around building resilience and more adaptability to things like climate change. Retrogrades, upgrades, and retrofits of existing structures would be more likely to make the final cut than new builds. And if new builds were coming in, it really should be something that for a community was absolutely essential, regardless of stimulus. Again, 57 times it was emphasized, we are still working out the parameters. Way too soon to tell, we are still working out the parameters. But plans that are talking about net new builds are going to need to be really compelling to win against the retrofit and upgrading piece, particularly around resilience and adaptability. So just so you know, that's the current thinking, and that seems to have been a broad thrust that's got some legs. So maybe it'll change. You can never say never, but at least at this point, think about what one might do within the existing built envelope rather than, as opposed to placing all your eggs into the new build category. Federally.
Okay. Patrick, did you have anything you wanted to add from the federal perspective?
Yeah, I mean, through our advocacy with the federal government, the FCM has requested, a large sum of money for our members directly for the municipalities in the realm of 10 to 15 billion. And I mean, we don't have any answers on what's going to happen or where that's going, similar to what Charles and John were saying. We've been sort of given the indication from our federal funders that do our part in what we do at this time right now to kind of prepare municipalities for those projects. So whether through supporting feasibility studies and pilot projects and kind of getting everyone kind of sort of to that point where that, should this funding be a reality, then they're ready to go. While continuing with our existing capital financing that could support these projects now. And I think a point to what John was saying, how that you need that match funding for municipalities. Our funding comes through the federal government, but it can be stacked with federal funding. So that can provide for some of that gap in funding that municipalities experience when they're trying to come up with either their third from, that isn't federal and provincial or territorial, or if it's half that they're looking for. So that is a point as well.
Great, thank you. I'm going to ask my next question, and then I'll get to some of the questions that I see coming in on the Q&A box. So, we know that municipalities fund their capital programs, as we just kind of touched on, through a combination of revenues, grants, investments. I wondered if you could share a little bit of your perspective on the sources that are currently available that may be undersubscribed, or things that are exclusive. For example, we have lots of northern and rural area representation. As we try and figure out what's coming next, there's a good chance that there's some funding that's available today and how we can access it. So Derek, do you want to kick us off, given the work that the Trust does?
Yeah, certainly. Thanks, Carolyn. I think the question of undersubscribed funding is a good one. But contrary to that belief, I think what we're really finding as a funder is that there is a lack of other programs right now from a granting perspective. And that has been a barrier over the past couple of years in applicants meeting our leveraging requirements. There is just not a lot of grant programs that are available right now that are well aligned to the kind of needs and projects that communities in our region are doing. That being said, there are a number of kind of local type of organizations that we're always encouraging communities or not-for-profits to look at. So there are really good credit unions and community foundations that exist throughout northern BC that are funding projects that are similarly sized to the community, so they're appropriately sized to the community. In addition, Northern Development is an exclusive funder to Central and Northern BC that we would always encourage municipalities and First Nations to contact us to understand what programs might be available to support their projects. But in terms of undersubscribed programs, I'm curious to hear what other people's thoughts are on that, because it has been our experience that there's simply not a lot of funding programs out there that exist right now pardon me, especially with the decision to put the Rural Dividend Fund on hold. That further challenged moving projects ahead in rural and northern BC.
Thanks, Derek. Patrick, do you have some perspective on this from FCM?
Yeah, it's hard for me to speak to what's available locally in British Columbia, as we're national and we're kind of all over the map. But I think the FCM in general, the Green Municipal Fund, we haven't seen sort of a lack in uptake as much as maybe certain sectors not as represented, which would include more rural and northern communities. So what we've done to try to encourage that and encourage the uptake in those and make them more available is, one is we launched just recently, it's actually relaunched a new municipal asset management program. This is designed more for small communities to kind of get some of their asset management processes in place to then look forward to actually planning more capital projects and that type of thing. The other thing is more designing some of our funding offers for remote and northern communities, whether that's offering 80% funding instead of our typical 50% funding, lessening the thresholds based on the realities of weather, the realities of what's available in those situations. So I think there's changes being made from our side to try and address that that gap for some of the smaller communities in particular.
Curious, just so that we give people some ballpark here, what's the size of the Green Municipal Fund?
So the Green Municipal Fund is actually a similar model to the Northern Trust there. That it's about $1.6 billion, but we reinvest most of that so that we can perpetually deliver funding and sustainable funding to communities. So if you're looking in terms of funding amounts, like if you want to do a feasibility study on a project, we can offer up to $175,000. For if you want to pilot a solution, you're looking at about $500,000. And then if you want to go ahead and actually get capital financing, our starting ceiling is about $10 million, but can be more under different circumstances. So we're not funding light rails, but we're funding community centers and the like of that size.
And Derek, sort of same question back to you. What's the sort of size of the funding that we're talking about for the opportunities through the trust?
Yeah, it's really program dependent, but for some of the programs that might be relevant to the conversation today, we do have a capital investment analysis program which supports business case development that will inform community decision making on whether or not to proceed with a capital project. So that because the size of our communities is fairly smaller, the amount of funding that it would take to do that type of a project is significantly less than what Green Municipal Fund might make available for a feasibility study. So that is a 50% program, and we have $10,000 available per study. We have one of our larger grants, which supports capital, is up to $250,000, and that's we'll go as high as 70% project funding on that. I will put a caveat on some of our capital funding, as we are in the process of evolving our programs and launching some new programs with different thresholds, and that will be coming later this fall.
Thanks. So I'm going to just ask a couple of questions that have come in on the Q&A dialogue box. And I think actually both Patrick and Derek, you might be able to help out with a couple of these. The first question that we got from Brian was really, use of funds. So, if we wanted to have the opportunity, for instance, to do some roadway work in First Nation communities, is that something that is supported through the funds that are available, or is that something that we'd go through another avenue?
I can tackle that first. It's a fairly simple response from Northern Development's perspective. So the types of projects that we're supporting are incremental to core responsibilities of various levels of government. So a roadway project would not be something that Northern Development would be looking at as part of its eligibility criteria. So it would have to be through an alternative source of funding.
Thanks. And Patrick, Gerson was a little bit more specific for the Federation, that you have provided funds to Indigenous communities in the past. So is there an intention to make grants available under any future programs, or will you continue to offer grants?
So is that specifically to Indigenous communities?
Yeah.
Yeah, so until very recently, we could provide grants to Indigenous communities as a municipal partner is what they would be referred to. So if, for instance, a community had a shared service agreement for their waste or their water or something with a neighboring municipality, then we could fund them through that. We've moved just very recently to try and operationalize sort of a framework that we can fund Indigenous communities in isolation. So without that municipal partnership, and that's speaking solely for the Green Municipal Fund, not across FCM programs. So basically, if communities are in charge of providing those municipal type services, then there should be grants available for them, yes.
Okay, thanks. John, I'm going to come back to you for a question. So there's a few questions on the Q&A app, but I think, you know, one of the, we kind of skipped over you in terms of the sources of funding, and it relates into a question that Jason has asked on the Q&A, which is really around, there seemed to be some discussion, and Minister McKenna was in the news talking about programs, and then that discussion just went away. And I think Charles alluded to this too, in terms of, you know, not ready yet to announce things, but how would you describe sort of that, you know, that as we're getting really into the construction season, especially in places that have snow, you know, is there any sense that we'll have a sense of any funding before this construction season's over?
I would share the concern. As I say, there's been a lot of interaction. There's been a lot of talk, and of course, you know, we were initially quite glad to see Minister McKenna's remarks, and they were encouraging because it looked like there would be some pragmatism and some agility to the programs. They've convened a construction industry roundtable, but we are still light on other than the advancing of some of the gas tax fund. We are still ourselves awaiting for some tangible announcements that will get some money into the economy. And there's really three aspects to it. One is the here and now. You know, right now, there's a lot of anxiety right through the supply chain. What happens with payments, with projects are delayed or costs go up because of PPE, supply chain issues, the COVID issues, and there's still a lot of bun fights going on about who's responsible for those costs. We're looking from leadership from the federal government, not only with their own projects, but we're looking for some virtue signaling from the federal government about how they should be dealt with in good faith. And that's certainly a priority because it's bad enough for engineering firms. It's even more acute for constructors and particularly trades. And in fact, a lot of them are going to be hitting the wall as we get into the summer. So it's not even just missing construction season. Some of these firms may not be liquid later. So it's about stabilizing the industry, getting money and pushing through with the projects that are already on the books. The next piece is getting money into the economy quickly. And this government is very, you know, this government, part of the brand is leveraging infrastructure for societal good. And that's great. And it's one of the things that they're very wedded to, and that's how the entire Investing in Canada plan is predicated. And we're happy to get them there because that involves some pretty interesting and neat projects. But we need to keep our industry and our other partners, we need to keep ourselves liquid. We need to keep ourselves in business. We need to retain our capacity and expertise. Then we need to get the money into the economy so we can create the economic capacity to take on these more aspirational projects that the federal government like to do. So we really need them to help us so that we can help them. And so what we've been saying is, yes, these are all great things, but in the short term, you need you to have a little more agility and pragmatism in some of your existing programs to get money onto the street quicker. There's a lot of there's a lot of money for pretty large scale projects, but they don't quite meet the criteria of some of the things in the Investing in Canada plan. And some of the things that those programs are pushing aren't particularly of interest or of use to a very small or remote municipality. And if we focus on big ticket projects and innovative projects, which are all great projects, but if all the money's flowing into major urban centers or greater population concentrations, we're going to even further consolidate the economy, our industry in particular, but even the broader economy at a more accelerated rate, and that's problematic. What we've been really saying is be pragmatic short term, help us get there, stabilize our industry, get the bills paid, push on with the existing projects, show a little flexibility around your programs, and then once the economy picks up, we're there for you, and we'll help you get your more activist agenda over the goal line, leveraging infrastructure, because infrastructure is a great tool for improving the quality of life.
Charles, I wondered if you want to add in your 2 cents here, because you have done a number. You shared with me that you've been speaking with regional municipalities and also with our provincial government, just to get a sense of how those folks are working together in order to stimulate the economy.
Right. So in the immediate term, there's certainly some leads that their primary effort, of course, is going to be at a municipal and band level. That's the folks that are looking at advancing these projects in the public sector. And there are point people at both municipal affairs and housing and transportation and infrastructure that are there to assist municipal staff. So if you have, and of course in the central interior, you'll have Prince George with 74,000 people, and from there the population levels tend to get smaller fairly quickly. So if you're in a community of 5,000 people, perhaps you're having no difficulty navigating the labyrinth that is senior governments. But if you are at a municipal or band level, and you're trying to navigate that, there are point people within municipal affairs and housing and transportation and infrastructure who are there to assist municipalities. And certainly what we've been doing is we've been making sure that municipal governments and band administrations within our particular service area, because we are a regional organization with a regional mandate, are aware that if you're not quite sure who the point people are, and of course if you have a fairly well-staffed development services office, you're very familiar with who you need to call. This is not new information to you, but in many communities that is simply not the case. So certainly for municipal affairs and housing, there's a fair amount of guidance that can be given to a smaller municipality that may not be at the point where they have the resources to actually get pre-engineering work done or pre-design work done to get all of the necessary work done to be final shovel ready. But there are a variety of things that they can do and go through discussions with their partners at Municipal Affairs and Housing to be ready so that when the money is available, they can quickly respond. Similarly with transportation and infrastructure, there are resource people available, and if your clients, if your members have a municipal government where there is a bit of head scratching on, I simply don't know how to navigate, they're absolutely welcome to give me a call, drop me an email. Not the engineering firms, the municipal partners. This was very, very clearly stated. We do not talk to the engineering firms. We talk to municipalities and band administrations and give them advice. So we're more than happy to make sure that if they're not sure where to go, to give the municipal partners and the band administrations that information for those discussions. And we're happy to do so.
I see John is unmuted, so I'm going to pass it to him because I think he has the same message I have.
Well, no, you were just mentioning, I just want to just reinforce, because this one of the big things in Ottawa, they love to talk about shovel ready, and I hear so many definitions of it. And, maybe it's this mystical white, unicorn, but people don't invest in all the pre-design work and the design work and put together tender documents to have them sit on a shelf in case there's a recession or a global pandemic. When people go to that work, it's because they have it in mind, they're going to go and do a project. What's very important is that projects don't start with a shovel in the ground. They start many weeks, if not months, in some cases years before. And our industry has to be busy now so that the constructors are in a position to actually put the shovels in the ground. And there's a lot of work that has to happen. We want to make sure that all policymakers are cognizant that it starts beginning. And let me give you an example of a lot of this is a little bit of the granular lobbying we do in Ottawa, but it's very illustrative of what we have to overcome. Is the National Air Photo Library under NRCan is closed. Well, a lot of our members use those aerial photos for floodplain mapping, topographical mapping, things like reservoir projects, a lot of projects that would apply to the Green Fund. And if our firms can't access it because their offices are closed, that's a problem. So, shovel ready is an overused term, and I'm glad Charles talked to you about the work that needs to happen prior to a project, because that is so important and largely overlooked, or not largely, but often overlooked by policymakers.
And if I could just point out, that was made absolutely clear to us by the engineering community in the Central Interior. We made that absolutely clear in our communications to senior governments, and I got what I got.
Yep.
Yeah, I think there are quite a few of those municipal partners on the call today, and certainly, if it hasn't been clear, that's how consulting engineers can help through the process, is to providing the guidance and advice to navigate some of these systems. And
know that we echoed exactly what John just said, because it's exactly what the engineering community in our region said. And at the same time, we at least have an opportunity to ensure that smaller, less resourced municipalities and band administrations can at least have discussions with the appropriate folks in municipal affairs and housing and transportation infrastructure to get as far along that path as they can. And certainly at the provincial level, our local members of the Legislative Assembly, I do know who represents me, honest, have been having discussions with the Honourable Carol James, and hopefully we'll see what happens. What we've got right now is if you have clients that are scratching their heads in terms of how they move forward, we at least can ensure that they talk to the appropriate people within the province to get as long on that path as they can.
So sort of along the same lines, we've discussed already basically that this economic situation is significantly different than past sort of recession situations, because municipalities have also taken a hit. So not just that some municipalities already had small teams, but there's been service level losses as direct revenues to municipalities have gone down, and they need to balance their budgets in order to operate. Are there some options out there that either municipalities can access directly, or that consulting engineers can support municipalities in identifying to offset the capacity constraints? Because the big concern that I feel, and we've talked about, is that, if the money comes, you don't have the people there, you don't have the plans in place to be able to do the work. Derek, I wondered, I know the Trust has some services available in addition to the funding for sort of business case. Are there other tools that the Trust offers to municipalities to support them?
Absolutely. Capacity, especially in Northern BC, is one of the things that early on in the Trust's life we realized was a challenge to moving projects ahead. And as a response, we created a number of capacity building programs. So we actually we operate an economic development capacity building program, which provides local governments with $50,000 a year to create and maintain an economic development or similar position in their community. And that's really allowed communities to have a focus on economic development on a continual basis that prior to that program being around, maybe wasn't the case. A lot of our smaller communities just simply couldn't afford or justify having an economic development officer on staff. The type of work that those economic development officers do is really dependent on the community and what their goals are. And it can really run the gamut from applying for and organizing communities in bloom all the way to focusing on major industrial redevelopment of closed sawmill sites and all those kind of things. So the type of work that they could be doing is really dependent on the community. We do get really good uptake on that program. So if there are any communities in Northern BC who are utilizing that program, just want to reinforce the message that that how you utilize that economic development officer is really dependent on the goals of your community, and can include things like working on progressing major developments in your community. The other program that we have as well, which I think is important to highlight, is our grant writing support program. Again, not all communities in Northern BC have the amount of projects necessary to have a full-time grant writer on staff. So we do have a grant writing support program which provides communities with some resources, some financial resources to hire a grant writer on a part-time or contract basis, so that they can be available to that community to access programs when they become available, or to support not-for-profits in the area as well in advancing their projects. So those are the two capacity programs that I think are worth highlighting.
Thanks, Derek. And Patrick, I think the Federation also has some capacity programs as well. Is that correct?
Yeah, we have lots of sort of mechanisms of support for allowing municipalities to learn more and get access to our funding. So that starts with our whole capacity building side that produce tons of resources. There's peer learning networks. If you want to connect with a group of like-minded municipalities that are looking at remediating contaminated properties in their communities, like that's something we can help with. When it comes to actually applying, it starts with people like myself, advisors who are there to chat about your projects, align you with the best funding product that we have, to make sure that you're not getting into something that isn't eligible and down the line you're wasting all this time, right? We're there to share other projects that have been funded before, so you can learn from those. Once you actually apply, then you get another point of contact that is there to support you along the way, to help you assess your application before it is sent to our peer reviewers, so that you're getting the best assessment possible. We really work hard to set applications and communities up for success when they're coming to us. So there's that support there. We also offer the costs for preparing an application. So if a consulting engineer is preparing one for a community that might not have that capacity, those costs are eligible. That then, if they're approved for funding, they can recoup those costs that they paid their engineering consultants to do, and to even interface with us along the way if that's not something that they can do. So we listen to our members' needs and try and support them in all ways that we can.
On that, we are aligned. While you're unmuted, Patrick, Sam has a question about the Invest in Canada plan. So basically, that the application review and announcement process is very lengthy. And so Sam's suggesting that it really erodes the quality of the application documents, because things change as you wait for your application to be processed. Do you have any comments on the proposed need for improvement in this process, or are there any opportunities to expedite the process to get funding to the municipal economy and deal with proactive capital cost management?
Yeah, I mean, I can't speak super specifically to the ins and outs of that application, but I know that is often a big barrier, whether it's that application, it's our applications as well. We hear the same things. And I think there's been, in sort of our community of practice where we talk to other funders and other applications, a concerted effort to improve that process, because it can be daunting thinking you're putting all this effort in, and then you may not hear something for 6 months, and then you're kind of just sitting there twiddling your thumbs, right? So I know from our perspective, we're trying to not only streamline the process, but provide more touch points of acknowledging where we're at, what's going on, more opportunities to give input instead of just that black hole that you sometimes get into. So as far as I know, in a lot of the federal programming, that is something that is also being looked at. So I hope that helps a little bit, but yeah.
It does. John, do you have something to add on that?
Well, I would say that the observation is correct. It is a pretty complex and lengthy process. And, big organizations, public and private sector, tend to have a lot of red tape and bureaucracy, all under the guise of decision-making and accountability. And there's always improvements. One of the very first things we've recommended, one of the very first things was that, at least in the spirit of getting money into the economy quicker, more quickly, we need to simplify the process as well as and that in itself creates some agility around the program. And we actually cited the great job Infrastructure Canada did during the previous recession, where they had a very expedited form. They stripped away a lot of the things that were probably less important in that context about getting money in the economy. And that's one thing that we feel that they should be doing for at least some of the money. Again, they still want to do their community benefits. They still want their carbon screen, and that's probably quite appropriate for certain projects. But but right now, we're trying to stabilize the patient. We're trying to get money into the economy. Again, it's about preserving the capacity of our industry, of our supply chain, of the municipality, so that we can be there to get these other more aspirational projects in the line. So, and now I understand. Now, in fairness, the government's been listening. They've been taking this stuff on board. I do understand that they've been in touch with the ADM that actually put together the stimulus program in 2009, and I even understand that Minister McKenna has actually spoken to former Minister Baird about that very issue. So there is some discussion. I don't think this government's going to be quite as aggressive with the sort of one-page form, but we are again looking for that pragmatism, and it's warranted. One observation, though, is that I find, and this is not unique to the federal government, but it's amazing people can be very creative and find good and better ways to do things when pressed and when there's some urgency to it. The trick is not falling back into your old habits, because if they can be appropriately diligent and still achieve some of their policy agenda with less red tape, it'd be nice if they could carry that forward into the future. But anyways, it's a discussion that has to happen, and with some urgency.
Indeed. So I have a couple of quick questions that I'm going to ask from the Q&A, and then we'll do a wrap up, and we'll let everyone go just before the top of the hour. Some time ago, our friend Jeff asked the question of whether there's any advantage to, let's say, political interference in terms of advancing projects. So this would be, should you be lobbying your MP in order to support municipal funding?
Well, theoretically, there should not be political influence on who gets funding. Having said that, I find most MPs are very vigilant about representing constituencies and helping them through the process and making sure they're talking to the right people. And that's their job, and they should be doing that. I wouldn't say that this is a case of lobbying your MP to get a decision made in your favor. This is a case of getting your MP to act as your representative to the federal government to help you understand the programs and how to get through them. And if there is issues and obstacles, that's a great pressure point to get some change. When there's, let's face it, it's all about, most vast majority of politicians are there for all the right reasons, but they do want to get reelected. And if they find that this is hurting their community, if this is hurting their own constituents because they can't get money into their economy, if they have their community broadly or specific constituents are under duress because of red tape, that gets noticed. And so the short answer, don't call it lobbying. By absolutely make sure that the MPs understand what's happening on the ground. That helps us enormously in Ottawa when they hear it, firsthand from their own caucus members and even opposition members. If they hear this, if they hear the same theme over and over again, it helps us immensely while we're knocking on the doors in Ottawa. We're zooming them in Ottawa, but we will be knocking on doors again someday.
I would
Derek
want
and Charles. Yeah, Charles, go ahead.
I would really like to take a swing at that. So I've been in ECDev 30 years, and I can tell you on this particular file, in terms of trying to communicate up to find out information to help municipalities, both the members of Parliament in Ottawa and the members of the Legislative Assembly in Victoria were very helpful in terms of ensuring the need to understand we've got to get this moving. We've got to get these are the needs, right? And at the same time, based on, and I appreciate cynicism exists, and I get that, but the I want my project funding is pretty well a great way to ensure that you just lost altitude. So helping MPs and MLAs be aware of systemic problems and the kinds of structural responses that needs to happen is an incredibly useful one, and certainly in our region we have found strong positive response in terms of help in navigating all of that. The initial posing of the question, though, I would not recommend that as a strategy, and I'd never stand beside it.
Thanks, Charles. And Derek.
Yeah, I would echo Charles' comments on that. I think, if your sole strategy is to have political will get your project funded, I think that's a strategy, but it's not the strategy that I would recommend. I think where your time would be better served is working with the funding agency in advance of submitting your application and making sure that your project is a good fit and that you're ticking all the strategic boxes that the funder is looking for in the program, and in just ensuring that all your documentation and everything is attached to make it as easy for them to process and make it difficult for them to say no based on the strength of the application, not based on political interference or will.
Yeah, think of your MP or your MLA as an ombudsman if you're having difficulty with the process, or if you just don't know where to turn. That is completely on side. But just the cigars and the dark leather chairs and brandy giving out money, that frankly just doesn't.
No. Okay, so we are just about done. So I thought I'd just do a quick around the horn. If you have any last thought that you want to leave the participants with. Patrick, you haven't spoken for a few minutes, so maybe we'll start with you and we'll move through and say thanks in a minute. Thanks.
Sure, absolutely. Yeah, so I guess just to reiterate from our perspective and our funding for you folks, and when you're working with municipal partners, the best way to get in touch and access our funding is to get us all, not around a table obviously, but you know what I mean. So feel free to contact me directly or contact our outreach team directly, bringing in your municipal partners. We can all discuss together on the best method of going ahead with an application. If you're interested, again, we fund from the feasibility study right to the end of the project. So hopefully that sort of gap that was acknowledged earlier about nothing shovel ready, how about all that work beforehand? We do have targeted funding for that beforehand work. And just one thing I'll leave with is I didn't get into it as much as I would have liked, but the Green Municipal Fund, it's green. So we are looking at projects that have high environmental impact. So that is something to take into account when you're looking at projects. But yeah, I'm happy to chat with anyone about prospective projects at any time. So it was nice to be here.
Thank you very much, Patrick. Derek, do you want to leave us with any last thoughts?
Yeah, I'll keep it brief. I think I had managed to make a lot of the points that I had gone into this hoping to make. So I'll just reiterate, if anyone on the call is from a northern community or is working with a northern community, strongly consider reaching out to Northern Development. My contact information is all on our website. We're very easy to find. We have money. We want to give it away. We do a pretty good job of that every year. So by all means, we do encourage engaging with us early and often. and we, we take great pride in coaching projects in. So I will leave it at that.
That's great. Everyone likes money. Charles.
Yes, so the primary takeaway, I hope, is that if you have a municipal or band client that is looking to navigate, we're more than, if they're not quite sure where specifically to go on the provincial side, we are absolutely more than happy to point them at the appropriate direction. And second of all, the BC Accelerator Network, the ACEC-BC network of resources available to business, we got on this because the engineering community came to us. So if there are other ways in which we can assist you to navigate the things that are curtailing you, please keep us in mind. And of course, that's hub space in the central interior, and each region has its own.
Thank you, Charles. And John.
Well, the federal government, like large organizations, big ship, small rudder, but there is I do believe that there is a willingness to lean in there. When a sitting cabinet minister goes out to one of her predecessors from another party, that shows that this is an all hands on deck. We got to get money into the economy. There's some barriers to taking things through the system. What I can tell you, even though it's disappointing, we haven't had concrete announcements yet. They are listening. In fact, in many respects, it's actually been very positive about the interaction with government. There's a lot of stuff percolating in the background. It can't happen soon enough, but I am optimistic that we'll see some positive news come out of the federal government. Again, not to ripping up what, it's about just getting money that's been committed, getting it into the economy, finding ways to do it better and be more agile. And in fairness, without having to sort of retreat from their commitments to the Canadian people in their platforms. So anyways, we'll keep at them, and I need to hear, about the challenges that our members are having, and we'll get there.
Thanks, John. Thanks, John, and thanks, Charles, Patrick, and Derek, and thanks to all of our participants today for joining us and for your questions. Remember, you can stay up to date with us on industry news, resources, future webinars by visiting our website, acec-bc.ca, and our COVID-19 Resource Center. That concludes today's session, and we look forward to your participation in an upcoming webinar event. Thanks very much.